This episode is brought to you by iZotope. Our friends over at iZotope create the most thoughtfully and intuitively designed software for audio repair, mixing, and mastering. I use their tools every day for the podcast, and I love it. And I think you will too. Go over to iZotope.com and check it out. That's iZotope.com, iZotope. Use the code FRET10 at checkout for a 10% discount. That's all caps, F-R-E-T, and the number 10. Welcome to Discograffiti's 2025 Patreon membership super drive. Now more than ever with our Beach Boys series underway, much of which will be living exclusively on our Patreon platform, this is the time to join, and I'm going to make it super easy for you. At the lieutenant or major tier, in addition to 3 or 4 shows a week, access to the gigantic archive of Patreon back episodes, and your backstage pass, you'll also get the following: an onboarding call with me during which you'll tell me all your ideas on how to make the podcast you'd like to hear. And whether I use all, some, or none of your ideas, I'll have listened closely and most importantly, gotten to know you. Plus, 3 months into your membership, you'll be eligible to appear on the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's right, an entire episode all about you, your band, your band's album, your band's tour, or whatever other cool stuff you might be up to. And not only do we make the episode, we promote it for you too. Last but not least, you'll receive a completely free digital copy of Metal Machine Muzak, which otherwise costs $11. Metal Machine Muzak is Discograffiti's double album Lou Reed tribute featuring 16-minute pieces by Lou Barlow from Sebadoh and Dino Jr., Corey Hansen from Wand, Mark Robinson from Unrest, and W. Cullen Hart from Olivia Tremor Control. Please tell all your music obsessive friends. In fact, if your friends do sign up, be sure to email me at info@discograffiti.com and let me know who they are, because I'll be sending you an additional surprise gift on top of everything else as a token of my gratitude. And now, without further ado, the greatest music commentary podcast in all the land, I bring you Discograffiti.
There's progression at every stage when we're talking about these records. And because the band broke up, you don't know where they eventually would have got to, but they were making strides at every point. And it's kind of interesting too, because obviously they kind of like settled almost into a traditional formula with Love Will Tear Us Apart, one of the last records. But up until then, all these songs are weird. All these songs have unusual instrumentation, unusual delivery. Everything about it's not normal, but also brilliant.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the music obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with the brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Joy Division, Psst, along with our special guest, Mogwai'S Stuart Braithwaite. Here's just a few of the many things Stuart and I discuss in this podcast. An exploration of their early punk years as Warsaw, the band's feeling that producer Martin Hannett never properly captured their real sound in the studio, a discussion about the successful bands of the 60s who we feel are vastly overrated, the pricelessly uncouth way in which they kicked their original drummer out of the band, whether or not this is Stuart's favorite debut album of all time, and an in-depth rundown of unknown pleasures and a bunch of early singles and EPs. If you're a Joy Division superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 15 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, but the major tier is what you want if you want it all, including, for you true music lovers out there, a guest-packed cornucopia of off-the-beaten-path episodes. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. Coming up, we've got Dean Wareham rating the entire Galaxy 500 catalog, all the living members of Moby Grape rating their own catalog, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, an unprecedentedly intimate interview with Marilyn Wilson Rutherford and her cousin and Honey's bandmate Ginger Blake, plus Season 3 of the Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True series, which will absolutely, without question, delve deeper into Pet Sounds and Smile than anyone else ever has in history. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! These guys only have 2 records. And so you'd think, well, how long of a packet of notes could one person take about such a band? But I have 48 pages of notes.
That's amazing. I'm glad you've went in, because even though I have read every book written by every member of Joy Division and every book on Joy Division, I've also got a mind like a fucking sieve. So like I was like listening to it and I was like, I know shit about this. What do I know? And I couldn't remember it. So if you remember all the details, that's good.
Today's guest is a singer, songwriter, and the guitarist of post-rock band Mogwai, with whom he's recorded 11 studio albums. He's also a member of the supergroups Minor Victories and Silver Moth. His is the type of music you create when you've grown up listening to records by The Cure, The Stooges, The Velvet Underground, Black Sabbath, not to mention the band we'll be talking about today, amongst other incredibly cool and forward-thinking artists. It all began at a Ned's Atomic Dustbin show at the Queen Margaret Union in Glasgow on April 10th, 1991, where our guest met Dominic Aitchison, and 4 years later, along with school friend Martin Bullock, they came together and magic was made. Mogwai debuted in February 1996 with the Tuner Lower single, and by the end of the year, they received Single of the Week from NME for Summer, which they were awarded again early in 1997 with New Paths to Helicon. Their first several albums, Mogwai Young Team, Come On Die Young, Rock Action, and Happy Songs for Happy People, punched yours truly directly in the skull and in the groin. But a funny thing happened which flies in the face of the typical reality. They remained great. In fact, in my estimation, they've never once fumbled the ball, which over the course of 35 years of record making cannot be an easy feat. In 2022, his incredible memoir, Spaceships Over Glasgow, Mogwai, Mayhem, and Misspent Youth was published. Mogwai's new record, The Bad Fire, was produced by John Congleton and was released this past January 24th. The band has described the record, which is currently punching faces and groins the world over, thusly. We often hear from people that our music has helped them get through hard times in their lives, and for once, I think it applies to us as well. Lads and ladies, you may know him as Plasmatron, but to his mom and dad, he's Stuart Braithwaite.
Thanks so much, man. Cheers. That was an amazing introduction. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming on. You know, we talked very, very briefly before kicking off the proceedings about how, you know, in the past, I had trepidation about these guys only because my history with depression, with artists who also suffer from depression, it's been like an endless black hole. And actually, I went into the listening of this discography with my depression leading the way, because my mom just passed recently and a few other things. I'm not depressed today. I'm beyond excited. So it was initially challenging to force yourself to listen to music that's going to get you even more down than you even are. When you're bummed, do you put on music to make you more bummed? Do you try to turn the wheel?
See, to be honest, almost all of the music I like would probably be classified by some people as depressing. I'm kind of drawn towards it, but how it affects me, actually, I find good music incredibly uplifting. Even if the content of the music is sad or reflective or very kind of low mood, it will still make me feel pretty good just because I love the artistry and the vision and the imagination and everything. You mentioned that about Joy Division, and yeah, obviously they're kind of inextricably linked to mental health problems because the singer Ian Curtis died by suicide. But I find their music really invigorating. I was going to say joyous, but that's maybe a stretch, but very, very personally uplifting. And maybe it's what they represent to me. They're one of the truest rock and roll bands of all time because they went into it with very little musical training. I think Stephen Morris, the drummer, he could play the drums, with other people in the band, they literally just picked up guitars and started writing songs because they wanted to make something. And that happens with a lot of bands. That in itself isn't particularly unusual. But what is unusual is that what they created was era definingly good. And it was really off the back of their hard work. They go from being a pretty good, scratchy punk rock band to almost inventing a decade with Closer. They came out at the start of the 1980s and really kind of laid the foundation for so much that would happen in the years to come. So yeah, there is that link, and some of the songs are really, really heavy. Like I think about New Dawn Fades from Unknown Pleasures.
The Eternal is about as depressing as it gets.
Yeah. That's bleak. That is super bleak.
Yeah. Do you see Mogwai's music as downer music, upper music, or do you not even give it a classification?
It depends record to record. I mean, our second record, Come On Die Young, we were actually talking about this recently because we've started playing a few more of the songs from that record that we hadn't played in a while. And it's really bleak. It's really down. And the irony is that when we made that record, we were 21-year-old kids, essentially, like getting to travel the world, doing things that we wouldn't have ever imagined possible, whilst making this really bleak music. And our new record, The Bad Fire, which I actually think is quite uplifting.
It is.
And we had the worst 2 years. I couldn't even go into all the things that happened. Like the one we've talked about quite publicly is Barry's little girl wasn't well. We talked about it publicly because he couldn't leave the country. We did a tour without him. And it's one of the reasons we recorded in Scotland. Other things happened. Lots of people close to us died, just heavy stuff. And off the back of that, we made this record that I find pretty uplifting. So I think there's almost like a kind of opposite side of things. Like you can afford for your art to be really, really bleak if you're actually doing okay. And you can maybe kind of reach towards something more uplifting when things are actually really, really rough. And the last thing you want to do is be, I don't know, playing like 2 chords an hour and weeping into your guitar.
Yeah. Even when you were kind of downcast, I'm hearing something inside the music that is vying for a better day. Like, I don't know why, but the song Kids Will Be Skeletons is something that for me, I always hear that in my head. And there's something transportative about that, where it's like you could hear people who might be in a bad place, but who are trying to get to a better place.
Yeah, and I can hear that, and I love that as well, because one of my favorite things about being a musician and about music in general, but from my position as someone who makes music, is when you meet someone and they'd say something like that, they'll be like, that song helped me when I was going through something really tough. And I think that's just such a special thing to be able to be involved with, to create something that has this other life that means a lot to people. I mean, it means a lot to me. And I think about how much other pieces of music have meant to me over the years. And we'll definitely go into it with this band because they're one of my favorite bands of all time. But like, I can't even picture them in the studio playing Atmosphere. I can't picture it because that song to me means so much, has kind of soundtracked so much of my life, that is not 4 people in a room playing guitars and drums and singing and keyboards. It's almost supernaturally special to me. And I'm sure they would probably hear this and be like, yeah, we fucking remember some, like they ate some really shitty food that day or whatever. Because I know what it's like being in a band. And I know that sometimes when you do something really amazing, it's just another thing that happened in a very mundane day. And I like that about Joy Division. They're really unpretentious, even though their ambitions are very, very high. They're very honest. And a bit like Mogwai, they don't talk much about their music. Like I mentioned before, I've read all the books by all the members. I've read countless books about the band, and they come across as being very down to earth. They're not kind of congratulating themselves all the time on that all this world changing music they've made. They're just a bunch of people making music that they love and having a good time with their friends.
Yeah, I mean, so much so that Atmosphere was unceremoniously dumped onto a French-only single. So
yeah, I mean, that's insane.
It is totally insane, and obviously rescued onto a great many compilations. But also, while speaking about honesty, another thing in the interest of full disclosure, as much as I love Joy Division and always have, I don't like New Order at all.
Oh, really?
The
Right,
only
okay.
New Order track that I like is that first single, and it's basically Joy Division anyway.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
Joy Division, and I like the electronic stuff that Joy Division does, but I don't like the electronic stuff that New Order does.
Right, okay. I mean, they're very different. They're very different bands. I'm very fond of them both. And in a weird way, they've kind of, maybe because I've been to a lot of New Order gigs over the last 15, 20 years where we play Joy Division songs. So in my head, they've kind of morphed, but they're very different groups. I can definitely see that.
There's a lot to get through, even with only 2 LPs. So let's actually get going here. Let's introduce first the characters in today's episode. So Joy Division, in case you don't know, they were an English sort of punk band formed in 1976 by vocalist, guitarist, and lyricist Ian Curtis, guitarist and keyboardist Bernard Sumner, bassist Peter Hook, whose 69th birthday is today, the day of the show taping today, and drummer Stephen Morris. Their musical style, they started off as a punk band, but their sound, as they began as a band called Warsaw, it was fairly generic and undistinguished punk-inflected hard rock, and they came into their own really only as the songs started slowing down and their music took on a sparser tone. And really, Martin Hannett, who is the fifth Beatle of the group, much to the band's dismay, because the band was always thinking that he was fucking their music up. But it was Martin who created that feel, in my eyes. And it was Martin who dedicated himself to capturing and intensifying, here's a phrase that I came across that I think is perfect, Joy Division's eerie spatiality. I mean, that I think really is, if I could boil it down to 2 words, it's eerie spatiality. The run-up on these guys is on June 4th, 1976. Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook separately attended that fucking infamous Sex Pistols show at Manchester Lesser Free Trade Hall. Both of them were inspired by the Pistols' performance. And the following day, Hooky, as he's commonly known, borrowed 35 pounds from his mom to buy a bass guitar. They formed a band with Terry Mason, who had also attended the gig. Sumner bought a guitar and Mason a drum kit. After their school friend Martin Gresty declined an invitation to join as vocalist after getting a job at a factory, because you can't turn something like that down, the band placed an advertisement for a vocalist in the Manchester Virgin Records shop. Ian Curtis, who knew them from earlier gigs, responded and was hired without an audition. Sumner said that he knew he was all right to get on with, and that's what we based the whole group on. If we liked someone, they were in. The Buzzcocks manager Richard Boone and Pete Shelley have both been credited with suggesting the name Stiff Kittens, but the band settled on Warsaw shortly before their first gig, which was actually a reference to the David Bowie song Warsaw from Low. Phase 1, punk sneer without the trademark icy chill, 1977 to 78. So Warsaw debuted on May 29th, 1977 at the Electric Circus, supporting the Buzzcocks, Penetration, and John Cooper Clarke. Tony Tabak played drums that night after joining the band only 2 days earlier, and reviews in the New Musical Express by Paul Morley and in Sounds by Ian Wood brought them immediate national exposure. Tabak was replaced on drums in June '77 by Steve Brotherdale, who also played in the punk band The Panic. Recorded in May 1978, the Warsaw LP, which was recorded while they were briefly associated with RCA, it's collectively known as the RCA Sessions, but the band were disappointed with the label's post-production work. The deal fell through, and the album was scrapped. May 3rd and 4th, 1978, the Warsaw LP is recorded, and even though it's within the same general ballpark as the demo, they've already grown quite a lot as a band.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's more adventurous and it's actually more ambitiously recorded, but I think they were probably still in a punk mindset, and that might be one of the reasons they weren't totally feeling it. And also, totally random fact, but the connection they had with RCA, that they even knew the people there to talk to them, was that Ian Curtis used to go there and see if they had any spare Doors and Iggy Pop posters all the time, like after his work. He was a huge, huge music fan. Another band as well that you didn't mention when you were talking about the influences, and I think this is quite an important one, is Black Sabbath. They all like Black Sabbath, and actually I think that Bernard, his guitar playing is quite like Tony Iommi, but obviously probably because of the equipment they had available to them, it sounds a lot kind of scratchier and kind of lo-fi, whereas obviously Tony Iommi's playing through 5 Marshall stacks and has a like 1960 SG or whatever, you know. But yeah, I always thought that was an interesting one too. But yeah, you're right. The Warsaw LP, it would have been a decent debut album. Obviously not as kind of iconic as Unknown Pleasures, but it doesn't sound like a bunch of demos. It sounds really good. Probably round about this time, they kind of burrowed themselves away and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and like went from a decent band to a great band, and probably shed all of the worrying about fashion and everything and just did their own thing.
Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show per week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. So for you, is the Warsaw record, is that a great record or just solid for what it is?
I think it's a good record. I think I gave it 4. I think it's a good record. I think it's more of a curiosity. If someone asked me about Joy Division, it wouldn't be the record I recommended to them. But for a lot of bands, this would be the best thing they ever did. you know?
Yeah, totally. What did you say you gave it?
I think I'm going to go for a 4. Did I say? Yeah, 4.
4. Okay, I give it 4.5. We're pretty much in the same ballpark. And I did write a little capsule review. So I had never heard this record before, nor the Warsaw demo either, before doing research for this. And I was very pleasantly surprised. It was oddly sweet to hear them assimilate, or at least to attempt to assimilate into a movement, one they were about to leave behind, seeing as this was only really a launching pad for the wildly original musical vocabulary that they were on the verge of actually creating. It turns out this was actually a style they had a bit of fun with before they shed this skin and started doing their own thing. Overall, this is really almost as essential, I think, as the rest of their later catalog. Like you said, I wouldn't recommend it first, but way better than it probably has any right to be. But the most important thing is Ian Curtis had not started singing like Frank Sinatra wearing a Dracula cape.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually think a big influence on Ian Curtis's vocal style is Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
As well. He was a really big Doors fan, which kind of cracks me up. I mean, I like the Doors, but I think of them as one of the silliest bands of all time.
Yep.
Whereas I think of Joy Division as like one of the most perfectly serious bands of all time, but it's probably just eras. If I grew up in the 60s, I bet I would think about the Doors exactly the same way I think about Joy Division.
I think the Doors and Cream are the two most overrated bands of the 60s.
It kind of cracks me up about the 60s because I always think about like so many bands that are like so underrated, like the Zombies or the 13th Floor Elevators. I mean, even the Rolling Stones, like I like the singles and I went to like listen to a full album and I just couldn't do it because I mean, I like blues music and it's just like fucking posh English guys like ripping off these blues. It's just, I just couldn't deal with it.
Do you like the Stones in the late 60s, early 70s?
I've never heard a good album. They're a good singles band. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even that crazy about the Beatles. They've obviously done some really great stuff, but every single Beatles album has at least one atrocious song on it.
Look, that's why Mogwai is so unique, is that your influences are coming from very different places than most people.
That's probably true.
Like, I don't hear all the same fucking stuff in there that I'm hearing from other bands right from the beginning. It courses through your music a very unique strain, like Joy Division, except you guys didn't have your Warsaw period. You went right into being a unique band.
I don't know if that's true. I think it took us a little bit of time to find our feet, if I'm being totally honest.
Where do you think you found your feet?
I think we found our feet maybe like 1997, the New Past the Helicon, Mogwai Young Team kind of era. Even then, I know the songs we were working on, we didn't record, and we were still doing some things that were not good. Like, I think we just kind of managed to work out how to not record them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everything we've done is absolutely amazing. I'm just saying that I think we got a level of kind of consistency around that time. Being in a band's weird because you don't think anyone's going to give a shit for a few years. And that's probably what was happening with Joy Division too. I'm sure they were like super absorbed with it personally and like getting some free recording time. They're going to go and like record all the songs they have. They're probably not thinking that people are going to be talking about it 35 years later, you know? And that's kind of what's so fun about music is it's very much in the moment.
Especially a band like this, a band like Joy Division, who really don't know how to play their instruments and are just creating something from the ground up. There's no way to know that not only are they going to be remembered, they're going to change the culture.
They wouldn't have been thinking like that. They wouldn't. Even like, I mean, we're going to get right to the end, to the live album from Preston. I've got a friend that was at that show and like, it was just another show. It wasn't like, I don't know, think of equivalent bands like The Cure. I mean, The Cure and Joy Division were peers of each other, like played shows together and everything. The Cure play a show, it's like a worldwide international event, you know? This was just a bunch of kids playing music, even though people were loving it. It's one of the greatest tragedies of the band is that the band as it was probably never understood at the time. Obviously the surviving members will be completely aware, but the band as they were never understood or never got to fully appreciate how amazing the music they were making was.
Well, that's a totally valid point because once Ian killed himself, it recontextualized everything they ever did. And I'm paraphrasing here, but there was somebody who wrote this piece. And what they basically said was, you know, the aesthetic tragedy of Ian killing himself is that the band's music ceased to be seen as the courageous, bold thing that it was and took on a completely different tone for the rest of time. And kids who find them now can never hear it the way it was heard at the time when Ian was alive.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And it also kind of cast a shadow over culture in a kind of quite comparable way to Kurt Cobain's suicide too.
Right.
Like, it affected their peers. I've not spoken to him about it, but I know that it really affected The Cure, for example, in a similar way that when Kurt Cobain died, all the bands from their peer group, they're just probably thinking, what the hell? Like, the golden boy is gone, and it creates all these very misguided narratives about authenticity and all this kind of stuff, when, as we know, it's just a tragedy, a mental health tragedy that like happens to people with all kinds of jobs that aren't in an amazing band. But there's almost nothing to do with it.
If he wasn't in a band, he would have written a suicide note, but he's in a band. So instead, he wrote Closer.
Yeah, exactly.
And same with In Utero. It operated in the exact same fashion. These were suicide notes disguised as records.
100%.
So to go back to just a bunch of mates fucking around, after the Warsaw record, Stephen Brotherdale, the band apparently was uneasy with this guy's aggressive personality. Do you know how they kicked him out of the band?
No, I probably have known, but I can't remember. How did they do it?
They were driving home one day from the studio. They pulled over and asked him to check on a flat tire. And when he got out of the car, they drove off. And that was it. He was out of the band.
It's the most 1970s anecdote I've ever heard. Yeah. Yeah, he couldn't go in public to shame him on Twitter back then.
Exactly. So in August 1977, Warsaw placed an advertisement in a music shop window seeking a replacement drummer. Stephen Morris, who had attended the same school as Curtis, was the only respondent. To avoid confusion with a London punk band called Warsaw Pact, P-A-K-T, the band renamed themselves Joy Division in early 1978, borrowing the name from the sexual slavery wing of a Nazi concentration camp that was mentioned in the 1955 novel House of Dolls. And the term was used in reference to the younger women who were imprisoned there, women that were frequently raped. December 14th, the group recorded their debut EP in Ideal for Living and played their final gig as Warsaw on New Year's Eve at the Swinging Apple in Liverpool. The band played their first gig as Joy Division on January 25th, 1978 at Pips Disco in Manchester. Joy Division were approached by RCA Records to record a cover of Nolan Porter's Keep On Keepin' On at a Manchester recording studio. On April 14th, they caught the attention of a manager named Rob Gretton. His determination was later credited for much of the band's success. Joy Division spent the first week of May 78 recording at Manchester's Arrow Studios. Ironically, considering what was up ahead with New Order, the band were unhappy with their record company's insistence on adding synthesizer into the mix to soften the sound and asked to be dropped from the contract with RCA. That is very funny to me. So Joy Division made their recorded debut with the self-released In Ideal for Living. At this point, I mean, they're still a punk band, but this, to me, they went from being a great punk band to being one of the great punk bands. This fourth song compilation I've known for many years because all of it's on Substance. Also, another thing I love is that Stephen Morris said that when they were making the EP, the band requested that the engineer make the drums sound like Speed of Life from David Bowie's Low, which is great because they don't at all sound like that.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the studio where Low was recorded would cost like the equivalent of like a couple of $1,000 a day, and the place in Manchester was probably like 50 quid a day. But I think this EP is just a perfect snapshot of the time. And it's such a good record. It's still pretty punky, but it's weird and it's imaginative. You know that book you were talking about where they got the name from, House of Dolls? I read that book. kind of such a Joy Division geek. It's trashy, absolute disgusting, trashy nonsense. But like in No Love Lost, like when he goes off on the kind of monologue, it's just super creepy, super weird. And I think that's the one where they put the synths on it, because the version that's on the Warsaw RCA demo has all these kind of amazing synths. And it's funny, you're right, that they kind of like completely switched up to go like heavy in on the synths really relatively soon after.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they didn't want to become who they were meant to be until they got this iteration of the band perfectly on target, and then they were ready to move on. So the Warsaw record, as good as it is, this is like they really got the punk era iteration of the band perfect. I'm going to give this 4 2/3 stars, just shy of perfect for me.
I'm going 5.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, there's a lot of 5s here. This goes for a sort of general overview of how I feel about music. If someone has a vision and executes it perfectly, it can't get any better. I've no doubt this is exactly what they wanted to do. You know, I heard they were upset with how quiet it was. There's a funny story about that, because Rob Gretton was a DJ. That's how they met him, and they got the record back, and it had never been mastered, because obviously you have to pay extra for mastering, and they're just kids. They didn't even understand this part of the process, and they played the record, and it was super quiet. Yeah, the actual original record, which I don't have one of, but yeah, it's probably not the loudest record. But yeah, as a piece of music, a collection of songs, the covers are amazing. The old Nazi drummer boy with the ye olde writing. I love it.
It's pretty amazing. But then they become a completely different band. So that's recorded December 14th, 1977, I should say, for 400 pounds. And on October 11th, 1978, they recorded a factory sample 7-inch. This is their first session with Martin Hannett as a producer. It's just a 7-inch double sampler EP, which was funded by a small inheritance, which had recently been bequeathed to Tony Wilson. It was the first vinyl recording to be released by Factory. And the cover of the EP is made of rice paper, dyed silver and sealed inside of a thin plastic bag. And I'm not going to talk about the Durutti Column, John Doe, and Cabaret Voltaire stuff, but Joy Division stuff, which is digital and glass, they're exactly who they set out to be. They are Joy Division. The Joy Division that everybody knows, it begins here, never lets up.
When you talk about Factory Records, one of the reasons that Factory Records became an established record label was because of the success of Joy Division. And the success of Factory Records revolutionized the record industry in Britain and Europe, and probably kind of spread to America as well. They took the power away from the major labels. The label that we signed to, our first label, Chemical Underground, would not exist if there hadn't been Factory Records. You know, even a certain Discord in Washington, D.C. is similar. So the music's revolutionary. The subject matter is revolutionary. The means of distributing the music is revolutionary. The way it's recorded is revolutionary. I think the only other band I can think of that had such a singular effect on culture is the Velvet Underground. And the Velvet Underground never had a consistent lineup, you know?
Yeah.
So it was kind of a vehicle for Lou Reed's genius, even though the other musicians were incredible. But Joy Division was just these people, and they literally were just a bunch of kids that met at some punk shows. And the time span of this is wild too. This is all happening within a couple of years.
Yeah.
Maybe a little over 2 years. And the music they made in that period of time, absolutely amazing. And these two songs and this EP are brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. Joy Division as well, they had no hierarchy for what songs they played. You know this? Like if you look at their set lists, there wasn't like a song that they always played. They would just play seemingly random songs. So you never knew what was going to happen.
Glass, to me, is only very slightly less striking than digital. It's got that monotone, zombified approach to Ian Curtis's singing. His vocals, just the way that he is transformed from their last outing to digital and glass, there's a major step taken there.
Yeah, 100%. Like, yeah, there's progression at every stage when we're talking about these records. And because the band broke up, you don't know where they eventually would have got to, but they were making strides at every point. And it's kind of interesting too, because obviously I won't jump ahead, but they kind of like settled almost into a traditional formula with Love Will Tear Us Apart, one of the last records. But up until then, all these songs are weird. All these songs have unusual instrumentation, unusual delivery. Everything about it's not normal, but also brilliant.
Yeah, much more so like the Berlin trilogy than the records that came before this, which were ostensibly inspired by the Berlin trilogy, but you couldn't really hear it in there. Now you can hear that stuff. You can hear all the Eno-ish twists. I mean, and now they had their Eno. They had a guy who could deliver on, although the drums didn't sound like Speed of Life, they had a guy who probably could do that if he were tasked with doing that. And here's my little capsule review on this. Here's where their sound begins stepping away from standard issue punk rock, aggro thrash, and starts rolling back up into itself. It begins to offer up its own wounds as songwriting grist. The pain and the hurt are exposed, and the wound is really raw, pulsating, and inescapably infected, and there's a centralized terror that you can begin to hear clearly. Although it's only 2 tracks, this was an important stepping stone to their first LP. One can train the microscope down here and start sniffing out clues as to who this band was. I'll give this 4 3/4 stars. I know you're going to give it 5.
Yep, 5. I'm going to become oddly predictable from here on in.
That's okay. I'm kind of the same. I'm hovering in the same range.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. All right, so on December 27th, during the drive home from a gig at the Hope and Anchor in London, Ian had his first recognized severe epileptic seizure and was hospitalized. Meanwhile, Joy Division's career kept progressing, and Ian Curtis appeared on the January 13th, 1979 cover of New Musical Express. That month, the band recorded their session for John Peel. And according to Deborah Curtis, his wife, sandwiched in between these 2 important landmarks was the realization that Ian's illness was something we would have to learn to accommodate. Phase 2, the freeze sets in, 1979 to 1980. Let's talk about June 15th, 1979's release of Unknown Pleasures. First of all, I'm just going to skip to the end and say I give it 5 stars.
Yeah, very predictably, I do too. On a musical level, this record is a masterpiece. This is like so ahead of its time. The production's amazing. The kind of world building of the music, like when you're listening to this, you're in straight away. You're absolutely in. Even just like weird, like they recorded like the elevator shaft. So there's a sort of like sci-fi oddness. Even the cover, like Peter Saville, that's another big character in this story who did all of their covers from here on in.
Which, in case you own the t-shirt and you're unable to explain what it is, it's an image of radio waves from Pulsar CP 1919 from the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Astronomy, which I'm guessing your dad is familiar with, right?
He would be, yeah. My dad was an astronomer, so yeah, he would have been into it. There's also a very similar image, and this always strikes me in the movie Alien, which probably came out around this time when they're landing on the planet where they find the weird eggs or whatever. On the computer screen, there's a really, really similar image as well. So I was born in 1976. I was a very small child when all this is happening, but I can kind of remember the 70s, from being a little boy. Something about like Alien coming out and Joy Division coming out with Unknown Pleasures. The world was a weird time back then. I mean, the world's weird now too, but like, there's probably similarities actually. There was a lot of uncertainty, wasn't there? There was the 4-day week. There was like massive strikes in Britain. Like, there was the entire country was covered in rubbish because the bins weren't getting collected.
This is the only Joy Division album released during Ian Curtis's lifetime, which is nuts to think about.
Yeah.
Also, no singles were released. Factory Records didn't release any singles. And also, thankfully, it has been recognized everywhere as one of the greatest albums of all time. And if you want to go into one of the great debuts of all time, it's certainly a contender for one of the greatest debuts ever. It was recorded over 3 weekends between April 1st and 17th, 1979. And in addition to the elevator shaft you were talking about, there's tape echo and bounce, the sound of a bottle smashing, someone eating crisps, backwards guitar, not only the sound of the elevator shaft, but the shaft with a Leslie speaker whirring inside of it. A couple of quotes that kind of go back and forth between the band and Martin Hannett. Hannett later said that Joy Division were a gift to a producer because they didn't have a clue. They didn't argue. And so he probably just looked at them and licked his lips, did one of these, rubbing his hands together. And then conversely, Peter Hook went on to say that Derek Bramwood of Strawberry Studios said that you could take a group that have got on brilliantly for 20 years, put them in a studio with Martin, and within 5 minutes, they'll be trying to slash each other's throats.
Yeah.
And also, he said that Hannett was only as good as the material he had to work with. We gave him great songs, and like a top chef, he added some salt and pepper and some herbs and served up the dish, but he needed our ingredients.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually funny when you mention all these things happening, because there's something almost prog rock about some of these ideas, but the found sounds. I mean, you kind of go back to like the Beatles and Pink Floyd and that kind of stuff. And then obviously they ended up recording closer in Pink Floyd's studio. But it's very futuristic. It's very psychedelic, but nihilistically psychedelic rather than kind of utopian psychedelic. This is probably when the penny started dropping that Ian Curtis was a genius. Like the lyrics are unbelievable. The music's great. I think their musicality improved over the next year or so, but the lyrics at this point were already untouchable. And the vocal performances as well, just absolutely brilliant.
Disorder, which was not only the first track on the album, it was the first track recorded for the record. All those bum notes on the bass, you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's the best part. That's the best part of the song. I look forward to that every time I hear it. I fucking love those bum notes, and it's my favorite aspect of the song.
I just can't believe they kept them in. But yeah, it's cool.
But that's what, to me, that's the most exciting part of the tune.
And I mean, Martin Hannett must have let him just go with it. He's just like, oh God, he's not even noticed. I'm keeping it in. This is fucking weird.
Hook, he puts it down to Factory Records not having much money for studio time and only having a few takes for each track. But he believes now that they add to the mood of the track, and he can't imagine Disorder without them. But to me, not only can I not imagine it without it, but it's the top part of the song. It's the hook.
It's actually kind of funny. That's my wife's favorite Joy Division song. And I'm always like, yeah, I like it, but those fucking wrong notes drive me fucking crazy.
Oh, you don't like that? You don't like the notes?
I don't dislike them, but it kind of gives me I do a weird twitch. I'm probably just too much. I've probably just spent too much in the studio trying to listen out of my own wrong notes. But I still love it. Don't get me wrong.
I can't compare that moment to any other song I've ever heard, because not only does he hit the note, but then he keeps doing that.
Yeah, he does.
And something like that is born from inexperience and figuring out an instrument on the go. And to me, that's pure inspiration. And you can't get a band that knows their instruments to come up with a moment like that. You won't get that. You won't get that. I mean, there's elements in their work, at least on drums, where I can't remember what track it is, but it's in my notes, where he's trying to get the tom rolls from A Saucer Full of Secrets. But Pink Floyd would never allow a moment like that to exist on one of their records.
There's a pretty epic drum fluff in Atmosphere as well, actually. There's a bit where the hi-hat goes totally out with the toms, I know, yeah, and I totally adore it. Stephen Morris is one of my favorite drummers of all time. So I'm not gonna be shady, but yeah, I do love the fact that quite a lot of this is a little bit rougher at the edges. And Eric's probably right. Budget's got a lot to do with it. You know, there's
Yeah.
a reason they were in at the weekend because that was probably the cheapest recording time they could get, and obviously they all had jobs all this time too. So they're writing and recording this music and going and playing shows when they can while not making enough money to be professional musicians. They're still kind of like very much at the kind of formative stage of that journey.
Yeah, I treasure their level of proficiency at their instruments here. You know, I would hate to live in a world where they remained as a band and kept getting better and better, because to me that wouldn't bode well for this particular type of music. And, you know, looking back in 2013, Peter Hook actually regretted that Disorder had not been released as a single. He thought that if it had been released as a single, that Transmission would have been dug a pathway to break out.
This was actually something that we took with Mogwai as well, because we didn't release any singles from our albums until our fifth album, and it was all because Joy Division. They actually ended up in a pretty sticky situation with our first album because we had to write all new songs for it because we'd released all the songs as singles, but there was no way I was going to put them on. And in retrospect, maybe that wasn't the smartest idea, but it was one born of all the best intentions. So I'm fine with it.
Well, it's like, you know, when you're a young band like that, like they're not necessarily my favorite band, but Oasis, you know, great songs were falling out of that guy in their early days. Yeah. And he was like throwing them on B-sides, thinking that those kinds of songs would just come forever, and they don't sometimes.
But also, I admire that, and I admire just like you're writing good music, put it out. You know, I see it quite a lot with the young musicians. I mean, even kind of saw it like with Kendrick Lamar, like his big songs not on his album, not like us. He just put it out, and people are going to be talking about that song in 20 years. Like you can't. I don't think there is even a physical copy of that song. It's just put it out because he's just making good music. It's amazing.
One other note about Disorder is that, and I didn't know that it was this highly regarded. It was named #1 on the Guardian's list of the top 10 Joy Division songs. I didn't know that it was held in such high acclaim. I knew people loved it.
As I said, it's my wife's favorite Joy Division song. I mean, I think it's really good. I think there's better songs on this record. I'd say that Shadow Play is one of the best ever Joy Division songs. New Dawn Fades is incredible. Interzone is incredible. Insight is one of my favorite ones.
And Wilderness.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great record. But I think Peter Hook's probably right. I think if they had released a single, that would have helped a lot, especially this was the era of singles of the Sex Pistols and the Buzzcocks and the Banshees, and bands had big singles that would have been getting played on Radio 1 on the John Peel show. And I mean, yeah, it definitely would have helped.
There's a bunch I could say. I mean, Day of the Lords could have been a single, I think.
Yeah.
There's something about Candidate where I love the space in the song. There's something about that reminds me of the soundscape of Eraserhead.
Oh, yeah. Which probably came out not long after this, so it's probably kind of part of the same world, definitely.
Yeah. Unknown Pleasures came out maybe 2 years after Eraserhead, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh, was it? It was after, right? Okay.
Yeah. But this song feels like, I don't know why. I mean, I've been eating a lot these days, so maybe that's why I'm going to the imagery of a bagel. But I think of a bagel with the inside scooped out when I hear this song, because it feels like a song in search of a song, which is an incredibly bold thing to create a song that's basically like a landscape. I love Candidate. I love it. It's so beautiful. And then Insight with the pew, pew, it almost feels like Death Disco. It feels like Metal Box. But Metal Box, I looked it up. It came out 6 months after this. So it feels like this created or paved the way for Metal Box to happen.
Yeah, definitely would have been in the same world and the same kind of like adventurousness. Even things like Throbbing Gristle, all this, a real kind of underground subculture creeping into the mainstream, which is something that you find less and less of these days. And I think the 70s and early 80s was definitely a time of really transgressive art in a lot of mediums.
Martin Hannett recorded Ian's vocals for Insight on a telephone so we could get the requisite distance that he wanted for that track.
I didn't know that, but that's wonderful. Insight's definitely one of my favorite Joy Division songs, and just the way that the vocal almost reaches a kind of crescendo towards the end is just absolutely brilliant.
And then New Dawn Fades. New Dawn Fades, it's interesting to me how that's been taken off the record and used in so many films. It's in 24-Hour Party People. It's in Heat. It's in House of Wax. It's in The Equalizer. It's another great song. It's probably the most straightforward and simple song on the record.
Yeah, we used to actually cover this. We used to do a cover version of this song at our early shows.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, way before anyone would have ever bothered even taping them or anything. But yeah, I always really, really loved this song. And it's just quite a simple chord progression, but really, really powerful and feels quite normal, but probably wasn't at the time. You know, I think it's almost a bit of a blueprint for kind of like heavy, serious kind of rock music, but it was definitely ahead of its time.
Yeah. For Shadow Play, Bernard Sumner, this is that thing of the sausage grinder where somebody doesn't really know how to play their instrument. So when you put the influence through, it doesn't at all sound like the song you're trying to ape. But they wanted Shadow Play to sound like The Ocean by Velvet Underground.
Right, yeah, it does not sound like that.
It doesn't at all sound like that.
No.
I love that so much. I actually probably, if I had to pick, I think the back half of the record I actually like even more. The record to me builds as it goes. Yeah. And at the end where it goes from Wilderness Interzone into I Remember Nothing is incredibly intense.
Yeah.
And this is a very easy 5 stars.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, 5 out of 5.
Is this your favorite debut record of all time, or is there anything you prefer?
That's quite a tough question. It's definitely up there. I think the first Stooges album I'm very, very fond of.
Even with We Will Fall, you still think that it's as good as this?
I love We Will Fall.
Yeah.
The big, long, boring song? Come on.
No. I don't think it is. But
No, but that's completely up my street.
So as far as Unknown Pleasures go, this is just one of those records, seeing as it's a debut record, it's even more impressive that it barely seems like a studio effort. It feels more like a greatest hits collection that could not possibly be just a studio record. The maturity and the individuality of it and the uniqueness that pervades this is just frightening. Total masterpiece from top to bottom. Not a single song that's any less than just perfect. And thankfully for me, I haven't heard this one to death. I made sure, for whatever reason, that I properly paced this one so I wasn't sick of it. So yeah, hard 5 stars for me on this.
Absolutely. It's a special, special record.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week, we've got part 2 of Stuart Braithwaite on Joy Division, as the band barrels into extremely choppy waters, yet manages still to produce music that remains unequaled in the canon of post-punk. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat, a peek into my top secret music past, including a rundown of the world's only rock opera EP, my 1998 release, Intergalactic Chump, the Super Dan Saga. There will be a short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of part 2 of the Stuart Braithwaite Rage Joy Division podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Stuart Braithwaite, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into cutting-edge punk action is to leap headfirst into the Sonic Boom Rates Spacemen 3 series. That's episodes 183 to 186. Tom Morello rates the MC5, that's 177. No Age's Randy Randall rates Jesus Lizard, that's 172. Michael Imperioli rates the Smiths, that's 164 and 165. Mike Watt rates the Minutemen, that's 124 to 126. The David Pajo series on Slint, that's 94 to 101. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, that's 32 and 33. Nirvana is 30. Bob Mayer rates the Replacements is 28 and 29. Pixies is 18. Jen Pelly on the Raincoats is 15. PJ Harvey is 12. Cocteau Twins is episode 3. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, April 25th, we're coming at you with part 2 of Mogwai'S Stuart Braithwaite Rates Joy Division. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!